I'm sure by now that you've all seen this headline saying screen time for kids under 2 is linked to sensory differences in toddlerhood. That's around 3 years old. You might have seen a more fear-mongering one like too much screen time might harm kids' sensory processing. Or even worse again, too young for screen time, watching TV linked to sensory disorders in kids. Or this one from an apparently actual university, putting your toddler in front of the TV, you might hurt their ability to process the world around them, new data suggests. Let's cut to the chase. New data does not suggest this at all. What all of these headlines are referencing is this article here from JAMA Pediatrics, which is a decent medical journal. Now, these guys were very careful in their title. They said early life digital media experiences and development of atypical sensory processing. They didn't want you to think that there was a causal relationship between the two, because there's not. One does not force the other. Early life digital media experiences are not found in this study to cause atypical sensory processing. It's just that the two seem to hang together. So what these guys did was they took some data from a cohort study. So that's a study that's following kids over a long period of time and asking them a ton of different questions. And these guys are just picking out a couple of questions from different time points to see if screen time is related to sensory processing later in toddlerhood. This is a good method. It helps you kind of identify patterns in data. They have about 1,500 kids to sample from, so it's interesting. What they found was that a single measure of screen time, just like a whole value, I believe, was associated at 18 months with sensory processing issues at 36 months. Now, there's nothing dodgy here. Their methods are fine. They've simply identified that there is a relationship between the higher amount of screen time a child gets in infancy and how that's then related to higher issues with sensory processing in toddlerhood. But they're not necessarily saying that the screen time causes the sensory processing issues, because you cannot say that for certain with a correlational or relationship style of study. In fact, in their strengths and limitations section in the paper, they actually say that the association found between early life digital media exposure and subsequent atypical sensory processing does not establish causality, meaning one predicts or forces the other, as parents may be more likely to allow higher levels of screen time for children with challenging sensory behaviours. Now, this critique is compounded by the fact that they don't have any kind of diagnostic information for these children about whether they have autism or ADHD or sensory processing disorder. They don't have any of that information to remove those children from the sample, because those children are born with those differences. They're not created in early life. It's incredibly hard to disentangle what was present from birth and how that has forced behaviors in the real world, like screen time, versus whether something like screen time, so a nurture kind of style approach, has affected children's sensory processing. Way more research needs to be done to identify this.